Welcome to the Daily Exchange. We are here talking with Dr. Craig Wright, the man himself, the Metanet, and the incredible vision that he has for that. We'll see you guys right after that. Welcome back, and I just wanted to firstly introduce and welcome to the Daily Exchange Dr. Craig Wright, Chief Scientist at nChain. Craig, welcome.
Welcome very much. I'm sorry, but I'm not going to do anything near as crazy as you did, but I'm glad to be here nonetheless.
Awesome. So just to give a bit of background to everyone, our special guest today, known as Dr. Craig Wright, sometimes CSW, others SN, obviously have done some incredible things for Bitcoin in your time as well, and so much respect. Wired Magazine obviously writing all about you. Also, you've been written about everywhere almost. There's so much publications. Obviously, recently been, or I guess of recent, it's hard to say. You know, you had the Bitcoin Cash fork. We had we've had then the Bitcoin SV fork. That some people are calling it the hash wars. I don't know about that terminology. It seems unusual. And then what I really want to talk about, is this new revolutionary technology that you've reimagined how we share and transact data, which you, I guess, are calling Metanet, which is incredible. And reimagining the internet. I want to talk about that. Craig, you're a big believer in the fourth industrial revolution as well, I believe.
I certainly am.
And your company nChain is obviously bringing that to a reality, and you've registered over 100 patents to date. And let's talk a bit about that as well. To start with, Craig, can you tell us about what is Metanet?
Okay, Metanet is basically the concept of actually putting value on information. Now, there's a lot of data out there, but to be information, it needs to have value. So if we're going to search, find things, and actually get what we want in the future, as we get more and more inundation with just raw information, which is just pure data, then we're going to have to find some way of finding out how to get to it. Mm-hmm. And valuing that will actually help us. So right now, if we go to Google really values what they think we want based on how many ads they think they can sell us. And that's completely, utterly the wrong way. I mean, the ideal would be we actually pay for a service where they deliver what we want. I mean, I was saying the other day how obviously someone searched for shoes or something in my house, probably my daughter, because I'm searching on my computer and I get Nike shoes, and I don't have Nike shoes. I don't search for Nike shoes. I don't search for Nike, and yet I'm getting Nike shoes on a completely irrelevant search. So
understandable. And so I guess, in terms of the internet, the overriding philosophy of having like an internet of value, where each packet of data, has a dollar value or a Bitcoin value itself. Tell us, do you think that where could that extend to? Could it be weather, Instagram photos?
Everything. We'd like to see it everything. So some of the things we've been working on, we've developed patents for, include streaming data channels. So back in the early days of Bitcoin, people talked about payment channels, not like Lightning, but the concept of two individuals being able to update their transactions continuously. Basically, you could have 4 billion continuous transactions with all the data put in there. So this is something people don't actually realize, that with script sig malleability, what you can do is hand data to someone in a payment channel where they can strip the information out of the header, then send that off to miners. So having a proven, attested way of sending information back and forwards between parties, which is then sent off to the network to be validated at a lower cost. So funny enough, all these things about stripping out malleation is a bad thing. Many of the solutions that we're going to be bringing in the next months, years, etc., actually require that you can do malleation on signatures.
So, I guess, the internet and Metanet are very similar. Can you sort of describe the key difference between Metanet and the internet?
The ability to actually pay and value everything. Now, that would actually be down to individual packets. So we could actually have packets valued on fractions of a cent. So as an example, we could have mobile IP where any device can actually start sending and broadcasting based on the user's sort of amount of battery, how much free power they have, distance. All those route calculations can then be done not based on routers in central hubs, but in a global mesh. So everyone's mobile phone could actually engage buying and selling information. So as it gains information through other hops locally, it pays. As people use it, then equally it starts selling information back. And the long-term goal with all of this would be even enabling removal of the whole base layer, making Bitcoin and the transaction layer here just the overarching base. So we would go to a combination of hash-based routing algorithms that we've been working on as well, right down to the concept of having different value routes. So people who have more or less money can actually just add the route cost based on how much available bandwidth, what they want for latency, all that sort of thing. So really an auction type process.
Oh, incredible. Tell us, what do you see as the main purpose of Metanet?
To make a complete global network that can't be interrupted, that will reroute against any attack, that doesn't have central hubs, doesn't have the ASN failures you have in the current internet architecture, doesn't have the reliance on 13 root domain servers that have been insecure in the past. Basically making something that is far more secure, that allows people to actually take control of their own lives.
Awesome. And tell us, where did the genesis of this your Metanet ideas start? Tell us about, how long have you had this idea?
It actually goes back to the 90s with an idea that Tim May had of BlackNet, which I originally called it, and was silly enough to even put in government research applications called BlackNet, which is probably the dumbest thing I've ever done. But no, Jimmy slapped me around and made me call it something much nicer and more friendly and whatever else, which is Metanet. So
cool, very cool. I like BlackNet because I like to wear black, but anyway, that's beside the point.
So, but anyway, not that I am today, but I generally do.
That's cool. And tell us about. We're going to get into the technology in a sec, but I just want to, set the scene for everyone to understand. How do you sort of see people moving from, onto Metanet and from the internet and that migration to happen?
It will start as a symbiosis. So what we're going to initially see is a combination of the existing internet plus Metanet. So this will allow people to initially have information stored on existing servers that they will be able to access and sell access to just using keys. So you could have encrypted information that you could store in multiple places. So one of the things that we've managed to do is have a multi-party Diffie helmet. That's something that I solved earlier in the year, and we've got a patent being filed for. That isn't the concept where people have two keys and a single shared key. It is 3, 4, 5, etc. different parties all being able to have a group key. Still with ECDSA, with all the traditional algorithms there, and just as secure. So that's part of it. So we can set up group sharing. Then on top of that, as we go further, we can then start using existing peer algorithms to start paid sharing. So otherwise, what you have is the typical Leecher problem. So peer-to-peer networks generally have people who want everything for free. But if you start paying people to save data, and we have methods to attest that the data has actually been there for the period where they said, then if you don't do what you're being paid for, you don't get paid, meaning that if you're going to actually be sharing part of the file or whatever else, which you won't even know, it'll just be distributed, drive backup all over the place. Eventually, that, of course, forms into industries, and people start creating small companies to store data. Things build. You have new forms of information storage, new forms of company, and even global distribution networks. So like we have Alchemy and others sharing files at the moment, in the future you'll have sort of shared peer networks. That then becomes part of the conglomerated central network. Not what everyone runs around going centralized and whatever else, but the concept here is to have one global interconnected network everywhere with everything stored in it.
Fantastic. And how does sort of traditional banks sort of fit into that as an, maybe?
Well, banks aren't sort of the enemy that everyone seems to think they are. Banks have a role. The problem is whether banks are honest or corrupt, or whether they're debasing money, that sort of thing. So the big difference in what we have with something like Bitcoin is going back to an earlier standard of banking, where people actually don't get to sort of help terrorists move money or money launderers move money because they get higher fees, where everything is then auditable, where there's no hiding things. And we've seen some of the world's largest banks involved in terrorist funding or money laundering or any of these things. And they get a fine and a slap on the wrist, and that's it. But imagine a world where there's enough transparency so that anyone can actually dob someone in and it can be traced back provably, where all those funds for sort of people selling blood diamonds can be stopped, where people engaged in sort of the illicit sex trade no longer have a means of funding any of their activities. That's what we change banking to be, something where it's actually about the honest distribution of money, where people can get a home loan, start a business, etc.
Do you think Bitcoin sort of started as a stance against banks to some extent?
No, I think people got that wrong. I have this problem. I mean, I always think people will read articles and whatever else because I do, but I'm slowly coming to the realization that people don't read past the first paragraph after the headline. And if you actually read the Times article, you'll find that it's not anti-banking at all. It was actually about the fact that the Chancellor was threatening banks that if they didn't start spending the money that he was trying to push onto them, that he would nationalise them. So the British government and certain socialist aspects of it were threatening to nationalise the banks again.
That's incredible.
Which is a little bit of a different take when you read the full article.
Definitely. So we'll just move on, I guess, just talking about banking for a second, but I just want to get into the technology. So nChain is developing Metanet itself. And I want to talk about that. So how does Bitcoin SV work in with Metanet?
So Bitcoin SV becomes the base layer. So Metanet works by having a means of paying, and that means many transactions, many small transactions, and the ability to have very large volumes of transactions. So what we're working on doing is taking this to now have a project we started a number of years ago called Terranode, where we're aiming to, within the next couple of years, scale up to having 1 to 2 terabyte blocks, which will give us, at that point, 1 million to 4 million transactions per second.
And I guess, the development of Bitcoin SV and Metanet are very intertwined, being the base layer. And nChain obviously is developing Bitcoin SV. There's been some commentary in the market that potentially this might make, Bitcoin SV centralized. How do you feel about that?
It's the wrong sort of thought about it. I mean, the miner network was always meant to be a highly connected small world graph. It forms what's known as a Mandela network. Now, as an ultra-connected small world, it's actually less centralized, even though there's one blob. What people don't realize is they use this term centralized, but they don't even understand what it really means. I mean, the centrality of the network is high, but the control over the network is actually low. And the more you scale, the less any one party can do anything to change it. So the real innovation here is creating a monetary source that is really, really difficult to scale. To change at scale. So once you get a really large block size, once you get the miners earning money through that revenue, making any changes where you're trying to alter the protocol for anything that's not a major sort of security flaw or something like that that's being fixed becomes incredibly difficult. It means you can't get people to change the 21 million block sort of cap. You can't get any of these other things sort of breaking it. It just scales, keeps getting bigger, and people just focus on doing that. So we're aiming to push that narrative and get the scaling happening.
So really, because the miners they've got to update the code and things like that. I guess you're saying they can just not do that, and therefore it's not it still is decentralized.
Well, yeah, the whole idea is not to have changes. So the narrative is a bunch of developers saying it's centralized because they won't let us change things. But the concept of Bitcoin was to not let you change things.
Yeah.
If you want to change it, make your own and compete, but don't try and change it. Bitcoin has been changed so many times, it's not funny. I mean, it's time that what we're going to do is take it back to the original protocol. There's a couple little tweaks we can't do. Not the original code, where people go, oh, the original code. No, there were bugs in the code. Protocol doesn't include security bugs, I'm sorry. We're going to fix those.
Makes sense. What kind of tweaks can't you do, Greg? What are things you can't really tweak?
What you can't tweak, adding new opcodes for the sake of adding new opcodes. They're not needed. Changing the economics of the system, adding sort of changes to the number of Bitcoin, changing the block discovery time, those sort of things. They're all the parts that make it the same protocol. And if you keep playing with those, you just alter it completely.
Yeah, makes sense. And obviously they're things really from the original protocol to some extent.
Yeah.
And I guess let's talk about moving on, but I guess talking about block sizes and on-chain stuff. So, there's a lot of data with Metanet that's going to be needed. And you've talked about gigabyte and even terabyte block sizes. And I really want to get into this because I think it's an important point everyone understands. Do you think all data needs to be stored on the blockchain?
All data won't be stored on the blockchain per se. There'll be individuals exchanging information and other such things like this. Now, an example would be, I talked about doing payment channels. So we have a number of functions that we've been working on, such as the use of a Zeta function plus a XORing function to create a secure one-time pad as we're sending. So what happens is we have an individual completely secure stream that is very fast to decode, where we could stream movies frame by frame, allowing you to do all of that and then pay at the end. So what that enables is something like I watched this really, really horrible, terrible movie with my wife the other day, and we had to pay for it. They didn't even have a rental option. Had 5 stars, and we started watching it, and 10 minutes in, the acting, the directing, it was just terrible. In this scenario that I have, you would start paying for it. You'd put a small deposit up to start paying for the movie. You get 10 minutes in, you'd go, this is trash, and you'd stop paying. And that would be it. So that small fraction would be the total payment. And then you would incentivize filmmakers not to make that sort of trash ever again, because they would take the money and run off with it. And yeah.
It's cool. With, I guess, some things that could be on-chain and some things could be, I guess, side chains. What sort of things do you see being on-chain, and what things, I guess, being more side chain?
I wouldn't say side chain per se. What I'd say is sort of information that is distributed through more private sources, where you have information that is encrypted, where what you're doing is not selling information on the chain, but selling access to keys. So the keys would allow you to decrypt different aspects. So you could get a basic view, Ryan Charles talked about the idea of having like blurred out images, so you could see a blurry version of a movie or an image, and then pay to have more access.
Makes sense. And do you think Metanet will pull data off the internet?
In time, yes. Especially when you start to think about we could make a lower cost version of sort of copyright controls. We can have artists able to publish their own information the way they want, charge how they want, track what they're doing. You could have companies like Spotify having easier access to be able to pay the artists. You could actually have every particular instance of a streaming media session instantly paid out in full to all the different parties. So we can actually say, this is the contract we have in advance, and the producer gets this much, and each individual artist gets this much, and the recording studio gets this much, the promotion house gets this percentage, and as you're streaming, all the percentages actually just happen.
Yeah. I think I can see your vision, and I think maybe there's probably, I've been working on the internet for a while. There are probably some companies that could feel like I guess make them enemies, I guess, of this, because you're sort of eating their lunch to some extent.
Anyone who's a middleman, yes. A lot of trusted third parties.
Yeah, well, I guess who do you think will be the most impacted?
Well, anyone who currently bundles information in that way and acts as a middleman. So tax auditors, one of the things we've talked about would be the notion of actually having sales tax directly paid to the government, so that there's no later audit or anything like this. It could just be automated completely. The company could have a full access to be able to enter their records. It's immutable, it's read-only, nothing can change. And a read-only version of that can be sent to the tax authorities, who can then see all your records and know what you're doing. That allows them to actually prove that you've paid your taxes. And all you'd need to do for a tax audit would be get a message at the end of the year going, thank you, this is how much tax you paid. See you next year.
Thanks very much. That's awesome.
And for the government point of view, rather than waiting months to have everything collected and then paid, it would be near instantaneous. 10 minutes later, you collect your revenue.
So what do you think the biggest boundary would be, getting someone to move from I guess this free internet or whatever it may be to this, I guess, more of a paid internet? I guess, is the internet, do you think it's free right now?
It's not free right now at all. I mean, right now you have web bugs and other things tracking everything you're doing. Look at Google. I mean, every time you do a search, the top of the page is ad, some other ad. Every time you go into something, they broadcast what you've been looking at through cookies. so that, well, basically they can sell you something you don't want. So at the end of the day, the internet is paid for using our privacy.
Makes sense. And then, I guess you talked a little bit about in your presentation, and this is, I think, where people are trying to, and we just want to give some clarity. You said, you want to make the internet a side chain. Can you just clarify that and tell us, how will that sort of work?
So basically, what we'll start doing is slowly monetizing all the information, allowing that to be brought in. Now, where people think that means people will be left out, it won't, because you'll still have advertising, but you'll be able to opt in and out as you wish. So the vision I see would be, if you want, people can pay you to watch advertising. Otherwise, if you don't want to be paid to watch it, be private. Maybe there's something you're shopping for, you don't want anyone in the family to know, then you can do that without advertising the fact. So you can go in and out of sort of the pay versus paid economy. And you can actually earn money sitting there clicking on ads and watching stupid advertisements for things, and getting people to sell you their ideas and paying you small amounts as you do it. So that whole concept then changes everything. So rather than having spam as a bad thing, you choose whether you want to actually accept this paid advertisement, and I'm a bit bored, I'll watch this 5-second clip because they're paying me a cent.
Makes
that
sense.
Sort of thing.
And you talked about in your CoinGeek presentation about Metanet, you wanted to release some technology next year about things that make credit or debit card tap and go payments archaic. Tell us about that vision. I think it's exciting.
So one of the ideas we have, and what we want to do, would be actually linking even the dumb American cards where there's no chip or anything like this into the blockchain, allowing Visa, MasterCard, or whatever else to actually then broadcast a transaction. So now on my phone or some other app, I could actually have something come up like the money button works, where I could swipe if I want to accept that transaction. So when I go into a store, if I actually want to make that purchase, I swipe and say, yes, I've validated it. So rather than signing, what I'm actually doing in that is digitally signing and sending a signed transaction instantly to the store. So not some stupid little squiggle that can be easily copied, but an actual digital signature. Now, from there, if at the same time I'm traveling or someone's stolen my card, I would then notice, hey, look, someone's buying shoes from an online store. Do I want these? Not mine. So rather than a fraud department having to check after the fact or having to try and track down illegitimate sales, I would have an instant record of what's happening and be able to actually say no. If I don't respond, then the transaction doesn't go through. Now, if I'm paying online, I'm going to actually want to respond because I don't get the goods if I don't. If I'm in a store and I go no, well, it's the same as if I put the wrong PIN in. So I don't get the goods. If I actually have purchased something, then I'm going to digitally sign it. And at the same time, I could be sent a complete invoice from the store that will be private. No one will be able to see it but the store and myself. It will be encrypted in op return and stored on the blockchain, but using a sort of basically one-time pad that only the store and myself would have access to, allowing us afterwards, either party could actually decrypt the invoice for tax purposes, for coming back for warranty purposes, for whatever else, having a complete record that I can bring up. Now, this is one of the things that people have missed in the security and privacy aspects of Bitcoin, in moving away from the original model where you moved from key to key every time you used it and you didn't keep reusing keys, and where you had IP to IP. That actually meant that you couldn't track things easily. So imagine a store like Walmart. So imagine if Walmart was using Bitcoin and every single transaction they did was on a complete new Bitcoin address.
Mm.
Walmart have something like 11,800 plus stores, and they have over 10,000 customers a day per store. Now, imagine you're getting somewhere between 10 and 100 million new addresses popped up just from Walmart alone every day through all their sales. Now, not only that, but if you do it right, there'll be no way of tracking that it's a Walmart address.
Yep.
So all you'll see is someone, you might have sort of seen that there was possibly change went from this guy to somewhere.
Yep.
And you won't know whether it's a change address or a payment to Walmart.
Yep.
You won't know whether Walmart is whatever else, even if you follow someone. So the only way to actually do it would be if you have good old-fashioned policing, human intelligence. If you catch someone, you can then get them to hand over keys, and then you can go to the store and prove what happened and that sort of thing. The way things used to work, not the NSA taking headers of everything, because at scale, you'll actually find that network graph problems are harder than ECDSA. They scale super exponentially, and at that sort of level, even the NSA computers wouldn't be able to track them.
Makes sense. So do you see the world where everyone needs Bitcoin?
Yes, I do. I see a world where everyone's able to engage instantly, where everything's stored, where I never lose a tax receipt ever in my life, where my warranty is recorded, where my life is private, where I get to actually be in control of my own identity, where there's no worry about centralized sort of access of PII, personally identifiable information that can be leaked out there about me, where I actually have control of everything in my life myself.
And I guess, with that, how will people, I guess, on ramp, do you think, and get as much, everyone's going to need Bitcoin, obviously. So how do you see that sort of playing out?
Well, over time, what our plan is really to make it used as a commodity. We're going to start with logistics uses. We're going to have businesses use it for EDI and basically payment bureau services, allowing sort of it to scale and be used in a manner that will start paying miners without the casino or the exchange value, because then people just care about the daily fluctuations and whatever else. So if we start large transport organizations using this as a permanent immutable record of all their logistics travel that they can't lose, then that has value, not because it's Bitcoin, but because it's an immutable ledger. And we start EDI and transactions between people like the Walmarts of the world and whatever else, so that rather than all these old EDI technologies that are horribly insecure and that cost a lot of money, we can make it near instant. We can have it transferred for bank transfers globally, all sorts of things linked in.
Yep.
Then the value of the ledger actually goes up, and because it's commodity, it becomes like a digital specie money. So like digital gold, in that there's actually a use for it.
Yep.
Not this store of value.
Makes sense.
Because it's Bitcoin, but a store of value because people want to use the ledger.
Yes, makes sense. So
in the next 2 years, we've got a number of projects that we're scaling everything up on so that we can get use. And then we're going to build up, and within 2 years, we want to hit the terabyte-sized blocks and be able to do that. And then we can really have some sort of the start of global use of all this.
Makes sense.
And that's only the first stage, and then we keep scaling from there.
Yeah, so I guess there's I guess within there's been a lot of questions about Ethereum and how it does I guess potentially could be looked at as doing micropayments with Ether and gas. Tell us about what do you think of Ethereum and how it compares with Metanet?
I think Ethereum is totally off the rails. Basically, the idea is that everyone needs to verify everything. Now, even if you start sharding that, you have the problem that sharding is actually a really difficult problem. It's NP complete, and that means no one's going to solve it without doing approximations, which then means central hubs dictating where things go. Not the concept of one central network, but actually people starting to dictate things. That's really the problem with centralization. A group that can't control anything, even if you call it a central group, isn't centralized. Where you have people sitting there dictating what things are allowed or not allowed, that's the problem. Now, what we're going to do is allow people to have individual transaction streams, which will include programs, and that includes the ability to run anything. The difference is we don't need gas. What we have is a negotiated process where you can keep looping, where the information can keep going back in through a payment channel effectively. So the payment channel can actually stream into the last payment channel. We can create a state channel. We have patented ways of having contracts that prove forward.
Yep.
So Bitcoin enables you to actually view the signatures that have been used in the last transaction, so that we can actually check certain combinations of signatures that were used in order, that the template format doesn't get changed,
yep,
etc. Allowing us to...
So Craig, I guess Ethereum can't really, be the future because, Metanet is a different technology.
Correct. Although, I've said this before, if we can run anything in years to come as we get more and more scale, and we have the ability to be able to loop and put all this information into what will become sort of the Bitcoin basis, then just like people have Commodore 64s running on emulators right now, you'll be able to have your favorite old blockchain running on an emulator within Bitcoin.
I love it. So there are other projects out there, like Brave and things like that do little payments for ads and things like that. How have you sort of seen them? Are they sort of inspiration for Metanet?
No, but they're along the right idea, but not going anywhere near far enough yet. So I'd like to see a lot more control over what I can and can't do, be able to actually tell a machine what sort of ads I will and won't take, to turn it off as I will, to pay for services I want, to not pay for other ones, to preview, to not preview. Basically, the whole idea needs to go a lot further. But I guess we're in the early days of all this.
And there's a lot of networks out there that are trying to, get lots of users on board, and some people have said really they've been, I guess not really succeeding that well. Why do you think Metanet and will get adopted, and how will you go about doing that?
We're going to bring in business. Effectively, we're not anti-business. We're going to allow banks to save information. We're going to allow other companies to do so. I mean, under US provisions, Sarbanes-Oxley makes it mandatory not to have certain information destroyed, lost, or anything like this. Under most legislation in the world, if there's a lawsuit pending, which is any large corporation in the world these days, you're not allowed to destroy information such as messages or emails or whatever else. I used to work in digital forensics, and the ability for a corporation not to have to spend millions of dollars to go out to a forensic guy like I used to be and have to search through emails and data and try and get it all in order is actually worth money itself. So just the ability to start having messaging provably when it was pruned, if it was pruned, to be able to go up to someone and say, they say, you've deleted this email. And actually, I deleted that a year ago. That was before this case happened, before any notification. Here's my proof of it.
Yes.
Those sort of things actually are very valuable to business.
So we just had a question from the audience, Craig. What happens if mistakes end up on the blockchain if it's immutable? Thank you so much for your question.
That's where we have a combination of keys and information. So mistakes might be there, and they'll be there forever, but we can actually encrypt things long enough so that it will be someone else's problem. All encryption will eventually be broken, even a one-time pad, because it'll be large enough. One-time pad-based encryption will take, might be hundreds of years. If we do it with AES, it might be 100, 150 years. We do some of the simpler things like DES, it might only be 10 to 20 years. But then we can choose different encryption levels and things like that, depending on the value of our information. Now, if we do that, that means that it is information that is available one day, but we don't care. Say, 200 years from now, my life is now public and searchable, but the reality is most people's lives, no one will care. It will be valuable for historians who can go back into find the history of people who became famous or became politicians or whatever else. And 200 years after the fact, no one really cares about anything because you're dead and gone and your kids are dead and gone, and et cetera, et cetera.
Makes sense. All right, well,
just imagine, for instance, we could go back to the 1780s and find out what was actually going through the minds of someone like Walpole as he was battling sort of the Corn Laws and other things with the Whigs and fighting change in the British Parliament as people tried to democratize the system, as we changed the voting franchise from 2 to 4% up to about 16% of the British voting class. I mean, all those sort of things. I mean, right now you get the writings of a few elites. Imagine in the future where the common man and his views can actually be analyzed.
And how would you like to be remembered, Craig? You know, in 200 years, what's the epitaph of Craig Wright?
I'm just some crazy guy who writes a lot of papers and patents and loves to create things and annoys the buggery out of people. That's probably the best way to say everything about me.
Say it again. You what? Sorry.
Annoy the buggery out of people.
Oh. Well, I think you also have some fans, Craig. So please don't think that as well. Now, I just want to talk a little bit about. Let's talk about Bitcoin SV now. And you know, what sort of the core design parts of Bitcoin Core that SV agrees shouldn't be changed, and things like that.
The base protocol from 2009 shouldn't be changed. So the original opcodes, the original scripting language needs to be fixed and put back in. The amount of reward, how that works, all of those base economic parts of the system need to remain the same.
Okay. And what changes have you disliked the most? And you know,
pay to script hash. It's horrible.
And why is that? Why is that, Craig?
Pay to script hash was a kludge designed to get around sort of the non-standard script issue, where a lot of miners weren't taking non-standard scripts. So rather than fix the scenario, like what we're going to do is have multi-threaded parallelized systems where normal cash transactions are given a number of threads, and then other transactions for complex scripts can be paid at a different rate and put on different threads. So normal money won't get bogged down because someone has a long, complex script.
So tell us, you know, we talked about with Metanet, you talked about in your talk, you know, blocks becoming 1 terabyte in size. Obviously, that might lead up to potentially being the blockchain being 52 petabytes in size per year. There's a lot of talk around at the market right now about how miners might handle this. I just want to help everyone understand in the community, how will a miner adapt to, mining a terabyte, say, block every 10 minutes?
So their network's going to have to adapt. But on top of that, the way that they propagate blocks, etc., will change. So right now, there's a lot of waste because we get a transaction and then we send the whole block out. So if you've already got a block, you shouldn't, got a transaction, you shouldn't need to resend that. It should just be the hash and the ordering. In reality, because if you have that transaction, if there's no collisions on the hash, then the transaction's good. So it's only transactions you don't have, and those in what order they're going to be placed in.
Mm-hmm. And
so that makes it more efficient.
And maybe can you just describe how the network itself will adapt? Can you tell us about that?
Miners are going to basically have to get larger pipes. We've been talking with some of the Chinese miners because people are worried about the Chinese firewall there. But one of the things we discussed with them is, for instance, you can get fiber to Tokyo. Now, Chinese miner between Beijing and Tokyo can then have a dark fiber link. Now, that would enable them to have two nodes simultaneously running, one in China, one outside China. And then what they're doing is matching transactions on their own network. So they can look at the header, and all they're sending is small hash information back and forwards. They have all of the same information. They know how they're ordering their own blocks, so that doesn't even need to be sent. They just say, this transaction is number one, this transaction is number two, and they mirror that on both. Yep. So if a block is found inside the network in China, then they send that information quickly out to a machine in Tokyo, and that can send it out to the West. And that just bypasses the whole issue of the Chinese firewall.
Makes sense. And if if maybe there's some things that won't happen initially, how will terabyte blocks happen? What's your vision of that?
So that's where we're working on a microservices architecture. What we want to do is actually start splitting out the different parts of a node. Each function will then be its own module, so that rather than having to try and have one monolithic system and try and update and manage that, we can have a high memory system where we need to keep the mempool, and we can have a storage system just where we're putting blocks historically, and we can have network distribution systems, and we can have the processing of script, and we can have separate system for standard script versus more complex script. And then we could have a message queue protocol between all of these within the network, allowing the creation effectively of a large cluster machine that handles many, many transactions a second.
That's really cool stuff. Wow, what a vision.
Well, I actually started trying to do that in 2013. And what you may guess is every time you change protocol, something like we were using RabbitMQ at that stage, it just breaks. So whenever core would change the protocol, we would be basically screwed. And they did that a lot.
Okay. And tell us, I think there's one of the questions I think everyone's always asked is, why does the original white paper suggest it's okay to make bigger blocks?
Because it's always been okay to have bigger blocks. The whole model of how Bitcoin scales is big blocks. The problem is no one seems to understand what peer-to-peer means. Peer-to-peer means person to person. So one of the key aspects of Bitcoin was I have an IP to IP protocol or a near field communication to tap to whatever else, individual exchange. I can walk up to you, the merchant, and hand you a transaction. That's cash. But then you don't know who I am. So if I walk into Walmart and give you a transaction, you don't know who I am. That's cash. Then you as Walmart want to get that off to the miners as quickly as you can. You're incentivized. So the miners are incentivized to actually do this because the quicker they get out there, the quicker they get their block, the quicker they get their money. But you as a merchant are also incentivized to actually broadcast this quickly, because the faster you get it to the miners, the less chance of a double spend. Right. So the lower your risk, the quicker you are. So merchants also have are incentivized to do this.
Yeah.
Now, me as a user, I don't care.
Yeah.
Because if you think about it, if I hand you a transaction, there are two options here. I'm giving you my change address. So the only way you can cheat me is by not sending my transaction.
Yep.
If you don't send my transaction, I'm cheated in that I get a free whatever purchase.
Right.
You don't accept my money. And as far as I'm concerned, that's not really that bad. I mean, if I go to Amazon and send them money and have a provable receipt of my money and they go, well, I'm not going to spend it on you. Damn, what a shame. Oh no, I've been cheated out of paying.
So I guess to really, what you're saying is to achieve peer-to-peer, as the original white paper says, we need bigger blocks, and to do
we need
that,
to bring back some of the things like IP to IP and fix those. I mean, it was turned off because of man-in-the-middle attacks. Right. Because there was no SSL, no authentication, no whatever else in the original version of Bitcoin. So if you go to Amazon, it's not an issue. If you go to your bank, it's not an issue. Everyone in the world has solved the typical man-in-the-middle problem, except Bitcoin, who turned it off. Yep. That was the old, let's just turn it off and put our head in the sand and it'll go away solution. I would rather actually fix the problem, get a whole lot of people who are smart and can do that sort of stuff and code it well, and then it's no longer an issue. So
really, Bitcoin ABC weren't super keen on increasing to larger block sizes. And, what are some of the other reasons why, SV, I guess, wanted to fork from ABC?
We don't want DSV. We don't want the concept of making anarchist coin. Now, money needs to be neutral. That means you work with government. You're not sort of working for government. You're not working against them. It means that you work for the average person, the average business. And the average person wants force of law. They want something that actually restrains government. See, what people don't get, like the ABC anarchist group, is force of law protects people. If you are a dictator, force of law doesn't apply. Force of law means law applies equally, whether you're the poorest or the richest in society. That's what force of law means. And that's what Bitcoin works towards. Mm-hmm. Now, if I'm going to have a problem in society, I want a system where I have the same rights as someone in government. You compare that with a Saddam Hussein who changes the laws to suit himself, or a North Korean where if you're poor, you get one set of laws. If you're in government, you get a different.
Right. So can you just explain, I guess, for everyone just in the community, just a follow-up on that. You talked about that you didn't want DSV. Can you just talk us a little bit about what is DSV?
DataSig Verify is an opcode that one of the ones they're adding to intentionally allow, as the CTO of Bitcoin.com has said, bucket shops, which are effectively illegal exchanges, derivative exchanges, betting shops, that sort of thing, unregistered ones, image sales, and there's only one sort of image that you pay a lot of money for that you don't want a tax invoice for, and it's not the good image. And they want Silk Road version 2.
Yeah.
And Silk Road was the worst thing to ever happen to Bitcoin.
What I guess why why do you think miners, I guess, should support SV as opposed to ABC?
Because we're going to build business support. That simple. We're not going to go out there and try and pump innocent fools of losing money on exchanges. We want to actually build value. We want to have companies, large companies that are going to put logistics information, contracts, etc., on the blockchain and pay for it directly. Mm-hmm. We want ones who want to not buy Bitcoin, but buy space on the ledger. And within 2 years, we see miners being able to earn much more than they will sort of just from the exchange value.
Makes sense.
How after big? The next, I'm sorry.
Oh, so you
just saying after the next halving, if we have our sort of scaling done the way we want, we foresee that we could probably get about $1,600 per Bitcoin based on the value in the ledger, not the market value. Whatever the hell it sells on market, that's a different thing. But the equivalent of $1,600 just because of the ability to put information in the ledger per Bitcoin.
And I guess just so everyone understands for the community as well, I guess why can't Bitcoin Core do what SV is trying to do?
Well, they'd have to remove some of the changes they've made. So they have to get rid of replace by fee. They have to uncap the blockchain. They have to get rid of SegWit. They have to allow malleation. They have to go back to all these changes they've been putting in there, saying Bitcoin's broken. They have to remove.
Do you think there's any chance of uniting together?
No, blockchains don't reunite. If it forks, it forks. That's the way it works.
Makes sense.
Eventually, one gets bigger and everything else dies. And if you think about it, the reality is when you scale, if we have a blockchain that does millions of transactions a second at a lower rate, why would you use the more expensive version?
Makes sense. And can you just talk us through, why it costs $1,600, I guess, to put the information on the blockchain? Can you just walk us through that?
It's not $1,600 to put. It would be if we value sort of logistics information and whatever else at say $0.25 of a cent per transaction, which is actually a lot cheaper than people pay now.
Yep.
Over 100 times cheaper. Then that will enable us to fill up a lot of information in blocks with people paying for a low-cost version of what they're already doing. So, and it will actually even then start opening up other markets that are still on paper. So if you look at things like bills of lading, they're all on paper at the moment. Years ago, back in the 90s, I contracted to Mahindra, and while I was there, I was involved with a few other companies, as well as some other people in Mahindra for oil, and I had the good fortune, I'll say, it was not the best running around experience that I've had, being involved with someone doing a bill of lading from an oil ship, and they had to get 10 different stamps. So basically what that meant was they had to literally go back and forwards with pieces of paper 10 times. So they had to get a bill of lading, and they had to take it in, not at the docks, because being in India, in the nice cushy air-conditioned offices where they did this stuff was in the center of Mumbai. And I don't know if you've been to Mumbai, but getting around Mumbai is horrible. If you have 3 lanes, there are 6 lanes of cars. And no one has mirrors for that reason. And then they would go back and they'd get the next one. And if something hadn't been paid correctly, it could hold the ship up for weeks,
right?
Which costs millions of dollars. Yep. So imagine now you could have a digital bill of lading. And if something hasn't been paid correctly or there's been an error, you could trace it back. And someone sitting in an office in London could now get the person directly by email, by Zoom, by whatever else, and go, okay, this is the one you need paid.
Yes.
Swipe, it's signed, there.
Makes
the stamp
sense.
duty's done, and the reverse is that a payment goes back, the duty's paid, and the bill of lading is actually instantly sent to the ship master, who can actually take the ship out of the docks and go. It's all done.
Makes sense. And so let's move on. Let's talk about. I think it's fantastic, and I totally respect and love this vision. It's awesome.
It's all about efficiency. It's a global world that is just hyper efficient.
Makes sense. Incredible vision. With the, I guess one of the things we had Jimmy Song on the show the other day. He talked a little bit about Bitcoin being a store of value, and now I guess you're really talking a lot about digital cash, and they're kind of two different use cases. Do you think
yes and no, except he's got it all backwards. You don't become a store of value unless you have value. You have to have a reason. Now, there are two types of money that have ever existed in the world, and Bitcoin is not a new one. One is fiat. Everyone knows this little piece of paper that is legal tender. It is currency because of a decree. The government says, thou shalt take this money. Everyone understands that. Bitcoin isn't fiat. Bitcoin is a commodity money. It's like specie money. It's like back when you had a gold coin or anything like this. Now, the value was in a gold coin because gold had value. People valued gold. People still value gold. It's a stupid soft metal that is shiny and women like to wear around their neck. And for that reason, husbands will pay for gold because there's always wives who will like that little shiny piece of metal around their neck. So at the end of the day, it's a commodity. Bitcoin as a commodity has value. Now, if we have people paying to use the ledger, and within the next 2 years, we will have, we're aiming to have at least 1,600 to 2,000 per of the 6.25 Bitcoin that are left in mining reward equivalent paid out to miners for use. And that will go up over time. We want to get that larger and larger. It won't go down. The cost of doing transactions will go down. It's just the nature of how things work, but the number of transactions will go up. Then you have a store of value. Why? Because there's an alternative use. And what people don't get is Bitcoin isn't something without alternative uses. There are other ways of proving data. There are other ways of having ledgers. I can put a hard drive into a safe and have it sealed. I can go to an escrow company now and have something done. I can go to lawyers and have multiple sets of stamps put on documents. I can hand it to a judge and a judge can put it in a court file, and you can pay for that sort of thing. So if I can pay for those services, then that's what I'm competing with. So the problem we had with Bitcoin was some of these things started. We have Factom and these people actually putting proof of existence on the blockchain. And what happened? People went out there and went, it's spam. Don't spam the blockchain. It's not spam. They're paying. They're paying miners for the privilege. They're paying for the commodity, which is the ledger.
Makes sense. And so do you think that the ultimate outcome, I guess, for Bitcoin is a store of value?
It will end up as a store of value because it's also used. So that's where everything starts growing. When you have it used as a commodity, then you have a base value. If there's this commodity that everyone is using, imagine right now if every single packet we're sending in this communication was earning miners a millionth of a cent.
Yeah.
And you'll go, that's nothing. By the end of our communication, we've spent maybe a quarter of a cent.
Yep.
Now, imagine that every one of the 5 billion active people on the internet today are doing that, and 8 billion people in time. multiply that out.
It's huge, massive.
All day. It's huge. I mean, you end up with multi-trillion-dollar economies.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because of a little teeny weeny bit. It's the salami slicing thing. It's that little slice of every transaction in the world.
Makes sense. Just talking about, I guess, Bitcoin's origins and things like that. You know, why do you think the original code was written in, I guess, C++ or sort of a script like that?
Old buggers like me like C++ and C.
I actually learned C++ in university as well, Craig. So I may look young, but well, I appreciate I look young, but yeah, I remember I've got my C++ on.
I used to teach it, so I can say that I am a horrible coder, but I am a university type coder. I'm not a developer in the real world.
That makes sense. Makes sense. You know, I guess there's a lot of talk right now about how mining and block rewards might, you know, and then transaction fees need to cover that. I think potentially the forecast is within 8 years or whatever it may be. You know, do you think that transaction fees in Bitcoin will cover the costs for mining?
Well, if we get to the next halving and we're basically selling a commodity value where we're getting 1,500 plus every block, then we lose 6 Bitcoin. We're better off than we are right now. So next time we do it, 4 years after that, we would hope to be 10 times larger at least. In which case, we lose 3 Bitcoin, but the value of what we're doing in the ledger actually goes up 10 times. So, and we go from $18,000 maybe to $20,000 initially a block to 40, and by the time we're doing the second halving, potentially $250,000 US per block for miners because of information they're storing. And that allows miners, even if we've got thousands of miners, to buy hard drives for storage, to pay for networks, to have data centers, all of the rest.
So that makes sense. So with, you know, the original white paper talks about digital cash, and it really only says the word Bitcoin once. Why do you think people see it as a store of value then and not digital cash?
What can I say? All these narratives that have popped up. You can't use the ledger. Peer-to-peer means the miner nodes. It's just insane. I don't know.
Do you think Bitcoin Core are wrong?
About many things, yes.
Okay, well, here's a hypothetical, right? Let's imagine you were gonna, if you were to rewrite, you know, Satoshi's white paper, what would you change about it or include?
I would go into more detail and explain what I think are very easy concepts, but no one seems to understand. Like peer-to-peer. Explaining peer-to-peer means you and I actually exchange. And now, if you bring up the white paper, you'll find a lot of these concepts are in there, but people gloss over them. In the section on timestamps, Bitcoin is a timestamp server, and it actually states, there's 2 sentences in there that state that the order of transactions in a block is important. And it says it, but it's only 2 sentences. It's not a big paper, so people gloss over and go, oh, CTOR, we don't need to keep order, we can throw that away.
Makes sense.
Well, no, you can't. It's important. I mean, it's like aggregating information to sort of like governments do, where you take the aggregate of the economy. It tells you nothing.
Yeah.
after you get rid of all the valuable information and you keep this number at the top that sounds really great, and it makes it sound like government's really important, because when you look at a GDP figure, government ends up with 30% of the revenue, and people say government's so important to this because of the way that they account for government. But whereas if you have the full cycle of business, you find that government ends up around 5%.
Makes
so
sense.
They go, these are just completed goods. Well, they're not just completed goods. They have to go through manufacture, and they have to go through sale, and they have to go through all the other processes, and that's all jobs, and that's all people doing things. You can't just aggregate the economy.
Makes sense. We talked about before, going into more detail within the white paper. Is there anything, like, I guess hypothetically again, that you'd regret most about the original Bitcoin? That, maybe if they fixed it, or I don't know.
That it's been changed.
Yeah.
Fairly much, but we're in the position where we can have that taken back to the original without all the bugs. I won't go into all the people who I don't name, but like Daniel and Steve at nChain are great coders. The guys at Korea, who are a company over in Slovenia, they're building some of the things for the SDK. They're all great coders.
Yep.
I won't give any of their names out and have them doxed on screen, apart from Steve and Daniel, who already do that to themselves.
So, Craig, I got to ask, are you Satoshi?
I'm not going to confirm or deny any of that anymore. I mean, I'm going to keep saying one thing that matters: proof of work. You shouldn't believe someone because they tell you something or they can sign a key. You should believe work. I'm a terrible Protestant work ethic type guy.
You seem like a hard worker. You seem relentless, Craig, and I respect that so much about you.
I like work. I mean, I know people think I'm crazy, and some people even hate me for it, but I'm not taking away from you by doing something. I know some of the socialist idea is that by me doing all this stuff, I'm taking away roles from other people. No, I'm not. I'm actually creating more work for other people.
I agree.
Every time I create papers, other people have to do other work. Every time I have ideas, other people have to do work. Everything I'm building makes other people have work.
Yeah.
So the harder I work, the more other people have to work hard too. So.
Yeah, and it creates an industry, Craig. No doubt about it.
Exactly.
Did Bitcoin ever have another name?
It was spelt differently. It had capital C at one stage. I believe I got people gave me shit about that, but if you look at the original emails and even the code, it had BIT capital COIN. But anyway,
makes sense. There's. I just want to clear it up because I'm over it, and people talk about this Tulip Trust. Can you just I don't really want to talk too much about it because I think it's your private, personal stuff. I don't think it should be public. But just if you can help everyone understand, what is the Tulip Trust? I
have a family trust. That's all it is.
Yep.
At the end of the day, I set up a trust a number of years ago, which I called Tulip, because of the whole myth of tulip bubbles and everything like that, and the error there, and some of the flaws in that theory. It owns Tulip Trading Limited, and Denarius and De Morgan and Wright International Industries. Wright International was formed in January 2009. Tulip was in 2011. And basically, like everyone, I want to structure things so I can minimize my tax.
Yeah.
So my trusts are there so that I have thought about the kids and family, because my wife and I won't be here forever. And rather than having to put it simply, shitload of tax we structured things in the early days so that the kids are already involved, and there's that's it.
I think I don't really want to
typical family trust to ensure that there's it's like succession planning. If something happens, no arguments over wills or anything like that. It's already set. It's already structured.
Yeah.
That's it.
Let's get back to talking about nChain and just the future, a little bit about the roadmap and with Metanet. When can we sort of see the first release, Craig?
Well, there'll be bits and pieces you can start doing at the beginning of next year. There are already things that are possible now. We're busily writing up documents on and how-tos. Examples will be what we call a Metanet URI. We can have the equivalent of a full web page done within a push data, compressed, but would decompress and decrypt on someone else's machine, but only on the right machine. So if you look at many of the current algorithms, if you do things correctly, you can generally have most of what becomes a Facebook page actually compressed in a single 1K Bitcoin transaction. And that can then make calls to images that don't change terribly often. At the end of a UTXO, when you want to update those images or something else, you write a new UTXO. So I expect in the first quarter of next year, people will start doing the equivalent of the early days of the internet.
Yeah.
Which doesn't say much, but everything starts somewhere.
Oh, 100%. And, I guess, maybe just talking about a little bit out, when do you sort of see maybe Metanet might surpass the internet in usage?
I don't know, because they'll be in parallel for quite some time.
Yep.
But what I will see happening will be people starting to embed invoices, purchase orders, rich contract information within transactions, compressed in a format that is secure, enabling them to actually have all of their information stored and then private, but also able to be pulled into a full like CRM or accounting package as their own ledger.
Yeah.
So what to the world seems a big muddled mess would then be pulled into only display, like a wallet would now, the correct keys for what you're accessing.
Like, what sort of year are you thinking, roughly?
Oh, I mean,
tough one.
Tough one, because the internet's still growing and all the rest. We'll start growing. Do we grow? When do we start growing faster? A hard question.
Yeah. But, okay. Maybe, when do you sort of see, apps being rolled out, maybe on Metanet? Because people are talking about dApps on these other platforms, but, when...
Oh, I'd actually like within the first ones to start next year.
Fantastic.
I'd like to start people doing that next year without any of the problems of crypto shitties or anything like that, without network congestion, without having to worry about gas fees, where the author of an app can put it out there and as it's used, get money, even years down the track.
And who do you think is going to be making some of these apps? Who are the developers behind that? How do you see that working?
Anyone.
Yep.
I'd like anyone to do it. I don't want to say what will or won't end up. I mean, I'd like just the same as who creates a web page now.
Yeah.
Anyone who wants.
Makes sense. And any particular developers that have sort of said they're interested in working with you on this, or that already started engaging with this?
There are. The majority is around business applications at the moment.
Yes.
But there are people who have expressed interest on gaming applications as well.
Makes sense. Let's obviously look beyond Bitcoin. I'm just sort of going to come down to sort of final few last questions, Craig, and thank you again for explaining all of these things. Obviously, is there any other cryptocurrency or other coin out there that you think is doing a good job or doing some smart ideas or whatever it may be?
I haven't seen one yet. Half the problem is everyone's looked at what Bitcoin Core did and has also missed the entire sort of idea of what Bitcoin really is. They've thought that you have to have this node network where everyone runs a full node, which is exactly the opposite of what Bitcoin should be. If you read the early things, Bitcoin was destined to end up in data centers. Sorry, but that's how it's going to work. And nodes will specialize. And over time, businesses and corporations will fight to get your money and compete. And then individuals will form the peer network.
Makes sense. I think there's a lot of sort of altruism and, philanthropy in blockchain and things like that.
Well, there's a lot of virtue signaling in blockchain. I don't believe in any of that stuff. I believe there's a lot of social sort of signaling and whatever else.
Yes. I guess, do you have any, how would you like to, I guess, bring that about as well or offer up, because I already think you are creating such an industry, you're adding so much value in that way, you're a great businessman and an entrepreneur. I guess I'll just understand from your perspective how you, apart from that, are there other ways that you're trying to, I guess in that kind of Satoshi...
Help people get an education. Help people find things that are valuable. I spend a lot of time in uni, but one of the problems I find at the moment is there are a lot of useless university degrees that people do just so that they can get a piece of paper. And that gives the whole university education sort of process a bad name. Now, if you're not doing something that's going to earn you money or teach you how to think, if it's not one of those two things, then you're wasting your time and money. And There are a lot of people out there. Harvard has started a course a little while ago now on scatology and poetry in the medieval age. So basically, shit in poetry in the 14th century. And they have a course on that. Honestly, why?
Makes sense.
What does it, if someone wants to study that as a researcher later, fine, waste your tenure. But the reality of this is, why would you want to do a bachelor degree or a master's or something like that where you're studying the use of shit in poetry? What's that going to get you as a job? What are you ever going to do? How are you learning to think better by studying when Chaucer said shit?
We've got some audience questions, Craig, to finish up with. We can just go through these kind of quickly if you want. First question is, how do you see, I guess, the world transitioning to a Bitcoin economy? What are some of the stepping stones?
We're going to have to go through, as I said, the use of a commodity ledger. We're going to have to get commodity value. We're going to have tokenized money. So with some of the platforms now available that are starting in Bitcoin Cash, it enables us to have, basically the US dollar that is issued by banks, not like Tether, but a real bank. Now, the only way you have a true stablecoin is you have a federal bank in the US or Bank of England or something like that issue something.
Yes.
And that will be one of the early stepping stones.
Okay.
So we'll have the what do you call it, atomic swap code out in the SDK next year. That would have been already, apart from the whole hash war and SV and having to recode a whole lot of things, that put us 6 months behind.
Okay.
That'll happen and allow people to then create exchanges versus US dollar to whatever else. That will enable people to start using US dollar on chain for purchases. So to a POS device, I can use Bitcoin without knowing I'm using Bitcoin. I can go there and pay for my goods in America in US dollars. I can pay for euros in France. I can pay with pounds in Britain.
Yep.
And I can instantly change them where I want in the world. Then people will have a wallet that pays for the microtransactions without even knowing it in Bitcoin. And gradually they'll start realizing that their invoices are stored within the Bitcoin ledger.
Yep.
And when they go out to things, they're paying in the Bitcoin ledger.
Makes sense.
And they'll start going and using things online on the web pages where they have to pay for storage in Bitcoin more and more. And the value as a commodity will rise, and they'll start seeing that they've got a choice of fiat that goes down in value, or this other thing that slowly rises.
Yep.
But as a commodity, won't be as volatile.
Makes sense. Next question was, what corporations are likely to onboard with Metanet?
As many as we can get. We'll actually be approaching some banks and even go up to the evil credit card companies and try and get them to do this, because at scale, we'll be able to have transactions more secure, with more security, faster, better settlement than Visa can do. So once we get that, I'd actually like to go up to Visa and go, hey, how about you move over to Bitcoin? Why? Because we'll save you money.
Very cool.
We'll get rid of your fraud department. We'll make it more secure. We'll enable you to have instant transactions, all this stuff. Go for it. Use Bitcoin.
Awesome. We've got a question here. I guess, how do we get Africa to be a key component of your vision? It was
well, that's actually part of what the team with CentB are working on right now. So they're down in South Africa, and they're aiming to have the Zimbabwe, South Africa, other like the Southern Africa corridor covered. So in allowing onboarding via cash, which is something that we have teams working on, will enable people to do remittance in that area. And if people can get in and out of different currencies like Rand or US dollar or whatever else as they're earning in those areas and transfer for fractions of a cent, then that's really valuable for these people, because with the sort of inter-country corridor between South Africa, even within South Africa and Zimbabwe, the cost at the moment and all the difficulties of getting money back and forwards to their families is horrible.
Okay. We've got another question here around people are worried you will validate your claim of Bitcoin disappearing by the end of 2019. They're saying by you dumping it. I'm not sure. That seems like a very emotional statement. But you know, what's your feeling on that?
Bitcoin Core is a dead end. I keep saying this. They've made a lot of problems. They're not going to scale. And it's not about dumping. It's about certain things will be fixed in Bitcoin, and as we fix them in Bitcoin, you're going to learn why they're a major problem in SegWit coin.
Makes sense. Just want to finish off. We've got two last questions, Craig. What are the next sort of 5 things you will see in your roadmap?
What are the next 5 things? Scale. Scale's a big one.
Let's break it down. Let's break it down because I think 5's a big number. Like I think I'm sorry to our community member who's put that question in, but just maybe go 3, like something just sort of tangible little pieces might help.
Okay, so the next 2 years, we have a scaling roadmap that's very aggressive. We want to get to around between 1 and 4 million transactions per second, sustainably. So that's number 1. Number 2, we want to make it so that we have a distributed microservices architecture for the nodes. We don't want everyone to have to run everything. We want people to be able to configure nodes depending on what their business is.
Yep.
That will enable people to make better business apps, make better sites. If you're only using part of what Bitcoin is to create a service, then only have that. If you only need the mempool because you're a merchant, then that's going to be part of what you can do.
Makes sense.
Next, SPV. I've said this a few times, I've hinted at it. SPV isn't implemented anywhere. There are no fraud proofs needed in SPV. It is remarkably simple. I've hinted at this for a long time, and I'm getting sick of people sort of not getting it. And no matter how much I hint, I haven't told you. I'll tell you in January, but
awesome.
That'll be after the patents are all locked in. So
awesome.
Sorry.
Super quickly, Craig. SPV, just for our community, just explain quickly what that is.
Simple payment verification, where as a user, you don't even need to be online. You can create and sign transactions without having to have full validating nodes or anything like this. And we can do it in a way that is just as secure as anything else.
Yep.
And in fact, we can do an SPV equivalent for a merchant as well, where we have a cut down version of the Bitcoin blockchain. The merchant doesn't need to keep petabytes worth of data. They just need to keep 80-byte headers for each block. And they can transfer sort of a check of the mempool off to a site that is shared. And it can be fast and easy and just as secure as everything is now, because very simple, either you have a collision-free hash algorithm,
yes.
in which case everything works and is totally secure.
Yes.
Or there are collisions, in which case nothing works and Bitcoin's broken anyway.
Okay, Craig, to finish up, we ask everyone on the show a question. When the clock strikes 12 on 2018, this is the daily exchange question. What do you think the price of Bitcoin will be?
No idea. All I care about is use. I'm going to get it so that in the next 2 years, miners are going to be able to earn thousands of dollars per block. By the time I finish in 2 years, I want to see miners earning at least $20,000, maybe $40,000 per block from commodity use. Not the exchange value, just putting stuff on the blockchain. All that spam.
Makes sense. Craig, thank you so much for joining us and helping answer our questions and explaining your vision of Metanet. I absolutely admire your entrepreneurialism as a businessman as well, and really appreciate you spending the time with us here at Crypto Finder.
Thank you.
All right, mate. Thank you so much, guys. That is the end of the show. And thank you, Craig, obviously, for joining us. We'll see you guys tomorrow for another Daily Exchange. Yeah!